Welcome to the Disrupting Obesity podcast. I'm Charlotte Skanes, and I'll be sharing ways to regain control over your body and lose an extreme amount of weight naturally. Being fat is about so much more than just the food. It's about your relationship with food. That means that dealing with your weight is about more than just the food, too. You have to change that relationship. You have to start disrupting obesity. Last week, we started the episode off with some super fun and sometimes totally rhetorical questions. This week, I want to start the episode off by talking about the dangers of resolutions. I'm pretty sure I talked about this last year on here, and I know I talked about it the year before that on my social media. I hate them, and I'm going to tell you why while there's still time for you to put a different plan in place. You don't need resolutions. You need resolve, and you can find that on any day on the calendar. 92% give up their resolutions. 80% pack it in by February. I think I called New Year's resolutions a culturally acceptable get out of jail free card a couple of years ago, and I still think that's true. Everybody knows that nobody keeps them, but we all still buy into this collective myth. Don't do it. Find your resolve today. You're welcome to borrow some of mine until yours shows up. If you're already daydreaming about those resolutions and starting to plan them out, and I'm not sure if this is better or worse, or if you're waiting to make them later, I really think that we need to have a chat. First of all, New Year's Day is almost 2 full months from now. And I shared last week that I'm struggling to believe that anybody is going to keep any weight-related resolutions this coming year. And I'm going to remind you why. The first itself, like New Year's Day, is usually a struggle because it's still a holiday, right? Mentally, we struggle with that. It's not an ordinary day. So there's obstacle number one. The second obstacle, super fittingly, is because the 2nd of January next year is a Thursday. That's trouble. The next thing you know, you're telling yourself that the best course of action is just to wait out the weekend. That brings us to the 6th of January. The resolutions are on some shaky ground already, and nobody's got enough earthquake insurance for this one. But all of that is still 2 months from now. You've got to do something between now and then. Don't wait. Every day you make a small change, just a slightly better choice, that's 1 day less that you're going to have to keep doing this. 2 months is a long time. It's going to go quick, but you could very reasonably have 6 to 8 pounds off by the new year. I know that maybe doesn't sound like a lot, but it's not nothing either. And it's a much better mindset choice to start now. Think of how empowering it will feel to know that you didn't wait. Not this year. This year, when New Year's Day rolls around, you've already got your feet under you. You've got 2 months of making those small incremental changes and starting to do the work on your relationship with food. That's a very different feeling from the usual pomp and bluster that come with the big formal deal that is New Year's resolutions. And there's so much pressure when it's a resolution. This isn't a gimmick. Weight loss isn't a game. Have you figured out how much I hate New Year's resolutions yet? I could talk about this for days. I could also just sit here shaking my head sadly for a couple of hours. We're not going to do that though. Instead, I'm going to give you 9 more ways to get through the holidays and the last quarter. Up first is know you'll be triggered by yourself. Last week, I talked about the ways the holidays themselves can be triggering. The people, the sensory experiences. We came at it from the more conventionally negative way that we talk about being set off emotionally. And we talked about it from the other side, the way happy feelings can become things that you comfort, reward, or cope with. Feelings are complicated. The last quarter is complicated. Today, I wanted to remind you of that because you're going to need to be aware that you're going to trigger yourself too. Don't forget that part of your brain wants to be triggered because it knows that if you get set off, you're going to eat a whole bunch of stuff that's going to release a whole bunch of hormones and your brain is going to feel super happy. And all of that is lovely, but you need to stay aware of it when you're losing weight. Something like an outfit not fitting could be enough to set me off, right? It would dredge up all those feelings of self-loathing for my size. I'd be angry and sad and frustrated and regretful. Why didn't any of my clothes look good on me? Why didn't I spend the summer trying to get the weight off like I said I was going to? Why couldn't I just do it? And I'd spiral and it would end in food. It might start with enthusiasm and like a renewed commitment to doing better in the new year, but it was going to end in food. Not only do you know how to set yourself off, you know how to trigger yourself so that it ends in food. And you can do that totally subconsciously. That's why you need to grab this stuff by the ankles and haul it out into the light of day. You're going to set yourself off, and your subconscious mind will do it on purpose to get you to eat. Go into this last quarter with that in your conscious mind. It's going to be a lot easier to make a different choice if you're aware of the undercurrents and underlying issues going on. You're definitely not helping yourself if you go into this with the attitude that everything's just going to be hunky dory if you pretend it's all fine. It's okay for it to not be all fine. You're allowed to anticipate stress. I'm not saying you should deliberately set out to be the cause of it. I'm saying if you know that it's coming, you can have a plan. And I just think it's better to not be surprised, right? So what's the plan? That's a fair question. The main reason I pimp awareness so much is so you can catch yourself in those moments. And instead of just being bewildered and keep going, you can say to yourself, holy shit, I knew I'd end up stuffing my face as soon as Uncle Morty started in on me. And here I am. The old guy shot his mouth off and I'm filling mine. That awareness is critical. I've also heard more times than I can count that it's enough to get you to stop filling your mouth, to slow down. The plan is to have the conversation with yourself when you recognize what's happening, and then you have to decide. Are you going to try and find something to do other than eat? I'm sure somebody else is having to deal with Uncle Morty and would love to talk shit about him with you. Just as one example, right? Are you going to find something else to do, or are you going to keep eating? You don't have to keep eating. I know you want to, but wanting to doesn't make something mandatory. Try to build yourself up in these moments. And I know that seems like the opposite advice that you usually hear, possibly because it is. But I really do mean it. Forget this whole tearing yourself down to build yourself up thing. It is horse shit. That isn't going to help anybody. You're worthy regardless of your size, worthy of good health and kindness, especially from yourself. Beating yourself up isn't going to work. Uncle Morty already made you feel bad. Making yourself feel worse isn't going to flip the switch here. Try the opposite when it's you setting yourself off too. You're responding to the same old situations in the same old ways, the ones you swore you weren't going to do this year. And you realize that you knew that was coming. So what's next? Take a breath. Just worry about that, just the breath. And then think. Ask yourself questions about what you're doing, the choices you're making. Ask yourself if another helping of trifle is the best idea right now. Keep paying attention to what you're telling yourself as you're reaching for more. Keep challenging yourself and those choices. Keep trying. There's no switches that you can flip here. There's no magic. I wish there was. There's small incremental changes and the choice to want something different, to want a better relationship with food, to learn to recognize when you're setting yourself off and ask yourself why. What's really going on? How is that going to dictate your choices? Our second tip today is self-sabotage spotting and being proactive. So, speaking of setting yourself off, you need to get better at spotting when you're sabotaging yourself. This does not happen overnight. I found that most of the time it starts with being able to spot it after the fact. Then you get better at spotting it when it's happening, and eventually you start to see it coming. It's like this with a lot of things, actually, when it comes to your relationship with food. Binges are another good example. You start out recognizing that a binge happened because a lot of us don't even realize that we're binge eating, right? Not a word, Gladys. Not a single word. Just because you can't relate to something, that doesn't make the other person wrong. I think there's a lot of shame around the denial that can come with binge eating, and it's misplaced. I really strongly dislike and disagree with this whole narrative that all binges are planned, or that all people who struggle with binges know exactly what they're doing, that it's somehow not possible for them to not know. I mean, how can you eat that much and weigh that much and not know? Because you can, Gladys. That's how. Just because you can't imagine something doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Like, I watched that horror movie Saw. I saw lots of things happen in that movie that I couldn't imagine. And then I saw them happen. So there are plenty of people who have no awareness at all when they're binging or when they're sabotaging themselves. They can't see that repeatedly putting themselves in the same situations and repeating the same patterns is a form of self sabotage because the end result is unnecessary eating. So you can't beat yourself up for this one either. You can't know what you don't know. I know there can be a fair bit of willful blindness with this one, but we're going to let that go and focus on forward. Whether you chose to stay blind to this stuff is irrelevant so long as you're seeing it now and you're going to choose to keep seeing it from here on out. This is also how you build up your ability to spot the sabotage while you're doing it and then eventually before it happens. The better you get at calling yourself out as this stuff, the easier it becomes and the faster you'll be able to see it. As a lovely bonus, it's a skill set that it gets better, right? You get better at it. And the better at it you get, the less often that you'll need it. I've done whole episodes on sabotage, so I'm not going to dive deep today. And I'm doing a special holiday sabotage episode in 3 weeks. I think it's 3 weeks. So we'll be talking about it plenty. Well, once we get there. But in the meantime, you can check out episodes 27, 28, and 29. That's the series that I did. If you're looking for more on sabotage and weight loss more generally, I also talk about enablers, which can be a form of sabotage. But the third episode in that series, episode 29, is all about self-sabotage. So there's lots of fun stuff in there. Tip number 3 today is a way to do the opposite of self-sabotage. Take a lower calorie version with you. Now, I get that this one might not always be doable, but if you're going to an event where there's a potluck option, bring something that's lower in calories but still decadent. My brownies come to mind first. But if you take my frosting recipe and make it in a graham cracker or an Oreo cookie crust, it's amazing as a pie, and the calories are crazy low. Both of those recipes are on my social media. They're probably easiest to find on my YouTube channel because there's just a recipe playlist. But there are a bunch more dip and dessert and snack recipes over there. And there are even more in my cookbook, which is conveniently digital and has hyperlinks to videos so that you can watch me making a lot of the recipes. But there's nothing wrong with bringing a lower calorie dish. You do it right, nobody will even notice, and you definitely don't have to tell them. Low calorie doesn't have to mean green salad. There's some seriously indulgent lower calorie food. And that's the big thing, right? Lower calorie food. You're going to be in a sea of bad choices. It's like a pile of pennies, right? Even a dirty penny looks shiny when it's lying there with a bunch of filthy ones. When all the desserts on the table are clocking in over 200 calories a serving, and you bring something that's 100 calories a serving, you just won by half. The mindset bonus here is that you know you're going to have an option. You don't have to look like you're sitting it out or like you're being rude. And yeah, sure, Gladys, I know that those are people-pleasing behaviors and we should all just stop them right now. But life's not that simple for most of us. And how about we just concentrate on putting out one fire at a time? Here's a little tidbit that you might not have considered. People-pleasing can be a result of living with obesity. Dealing with obesity can help people with the people-pleasing. So, let's deal with what we can. I'm not sure why I cared so much what other people thought about what I did or did not eat, but I did care a lot. And it was a funny contradiction sometimes because I was so upset by feeling judged, whether it was real or just in my head. And it could have been either one. But it upset me so much. But at the same time, I was in denial about how much I was eating. That doesn't even seem possible. Now that I'm really thinking about this, I feel like the way that I always phrased it to myself was probably significant. I would say that I didn't let people see me eat. Like, I kept it about the visual. I never said I didn't let people see how much I ate. It was the physical eating. But I still see a contradiction there when I look back at it now. I think judgment can be a barrier with bringing lower calorie dishes too. I didn't always want people to know about my journey. I was super negative. Um, and I would imagine that they were thinking all kinds of things like, what is she even doing? Who does she think she's fooling? Like, oh, yeah, I'll bet she eats like that all the time. I thought people were going to laugh at me. I've learned that people are generally way too self absorbed to care. Also, there are ways to do this so that nobody will know. I can get 1,000 calories out of a pan of brownies and nobody ever notices. Ever. Not one time. They can seem decadent and taste decadent and be anything but. My pavlova, which is a traditional Christmas dessert in Australia, I learned that, and the reason I hacked it in the first place is because of that. I've had Aussie flamingos from the very beginning, and I absolutely love them. So I wanted to hack this pavlova. Anyway, I did. My pavlova has 129 calories for the whole pavlova, and it's a full-sized one. It's not an individual one. Like, it serves a whole bunch of people. Nobody notices. Knowing you have options is a mental safety net. It helps you to feel better about the entire situation. You're exerting control over something you can control. That feels really good, especially when you recognize it for the win that it is and feel good about yourself for having made a choice that's so proactive. I've touched on this next one a little bit today, but I wanted it to have its own segment because I think it's one of the ways that you can be extremely proactive. And that's to be kind to yourself. Take it easy on yourself. The last quarter is stressful. There's a lot of pressure. There's so much pressure. And not just about food stuff, about all the stuff. Last week when I was talking about triggers, I probably should have sprinkled a little of this on there. You're going to be triggered. Things are going to set you off. Be kind to yourself. Acknowledge how stressful this is. Don't try to pretend that it's not. Give yourself some grace. Do the best you can. And then you can honestly tell yourself that you're doing the best you can when you start beating yourself up. This last quarter's already going to be different. You're here. I'm sorry, but that makes a difference. I've been doing my damnedest to help shift your perspective, if only a little. But those little shifts can add up to big differences. Be as kind to yourself as you are when you're at your best with others. Stick up for yourself with yourself. Stop using absolutes like always and never. Whenever you catch yourself saying or thinking that you always do something or you never do something, call yourself out. You're probably lying. There are exceptions to just about everything. Maybe you do make bad choices a lot of the time, maybe even most of the time, but it can't be every single time. Nobody's that consistent. Give yourself grace and try to be patient with yourself. Patience is kindness, and you deserve kindness. Let's switch gears for a minute and do something pretty concrete. That's going to be tip number 5. Don't eat standing up. Now, this one ties nicely back to one of the tips from last week where I was talking about intentional eating. It is super hard to be present and mindful if you're standing up. I'm convinced that our brains just don't register the calories in the same way. They're not as satisfying. You need to be as present as possible, especially when you're dealing with calorie dense foods. I mean, okay, fine, you're not paying attention to every bite of the loose leaf salad with a vinaigrette dressing. Fine. But if you're not paying attention to your cream covered, cheese encrusted, chocolate filled, whatever it is, if you're not paying attention to something where every bite has as many calories as the entire plate of the damn salad, you're in trouble in a hurry. You've got to pay attention, and that's harder to do if you're standing up. This was a safety net for me both times I lost weight, and not just at the holidays. The whole time. Both times. I didn't eat standing up at all. It was a trap for me. I'd be standing in the refrigerator door or walking back from the kitchen and just popping food into my mouth, food that didn't register with my brain or my stomach, just mindless munching. I feel like it's been a while since I talked on here about safety nets. They're a staple in my program, but I feel like it's been a minute since we chatted about them. Episode 21 is called Safety Nets and Zebras, and I do talk about them there, but that one is a really tough episode, and I don't don't know if I'd recommend that one for holiday listening, to be honest with you. Uh, yeah, it's a long story, but that was one of the hardest episodes I've ever made. It's where I kind of really outline some of my healthcare stuff. Um, but safety nets are like rules, only better. Most of us hear the word rule and just shut down. We don't typically like rules. When I think of safety nets, though, I always think of trapeze artists. They have a net and they know they have a net, and they also have the confidence to soar. That's what my weight loss safety nets do for me. They give me confidence to soar because I know that even if I do fall, I'm not going to smash my face off the pavement. Not standing up while eating was one of my first safety nets, and it's still in place almost all of the time for me, like right now. I eat when I can be present. That means I don't eat standing up. Just give this one a whirl this last quarter and see if it makes a difference for you too. I really want you to be as present as you can. So just so that you're more satisfied overall. If you don't pay attention to your food, it doesn't register in the same way and you're not as satisfied. We all want it to register. You should be able to remember the thing you enjoyed most about what you ate. You should be able to remember the experience of eating it. Something else I want you to remember is tip number 6 on our list this episode. Remember, it's just one day. Okay, I realize that the last quarter is filled with a whole bunch of one days. Sometimes we get a bunch of them in a row, but there's still just one day. You still have to keep going. And this one ties back to my last tip. There's no point beating yourself up for yesterday. It only leads to worse eating today. That's definitely not what you're after, unless it is, and it might be. You should be on high alert for self-sabotage with this one, big time. It ties back to the whole guilt and shame spiral thing, right? You eat unnecessarily, which makes you feel bad about yourself. So you eat more, which makes you feel worse, which makes you eat, and around and around and around it goes. It's an important pattern to recognize because you can't do anything about it unless you know it's happening. And it's just as important to be able to recognize it because it can actually be a form of self-sabotage that on some level you let yourself fall into because you know the end result will be eating. Yeah, it sucks, but part of your brain knows that the pain it causes will be worth it because it ends in food. Our spirals and patterns can be comfortable because they're what we know. And that's how you can know something isn't working, that it's bad for you, but you just keep turning to it again and again. It's what you know. And most of the time as human beings, we default to finding comfort in the known as opposed to the unknown. You might have blown the day. You might have. It happens. It's over. It sucks, and it might even be regrettable. You can't go back and change it. You can make better choices now. You can make better choices tomorrow. And you're a lot more likely to do that if you stay calm and decide to have a better day from here on out. You can dwell on it if you want to, but that's far more likely to lead to bad choices and worse eating. It's one day. And I know you've had a bunch of them, but we're still going to keep going. I also know that it may feel like all you're doing is picking yourself up and dusting yourself off again and again. You are. That's how this works. That's how life works. You can do it. And I promise it will get easier. Tip number 7 is going to make things easier too. Don't skip your favorites. You'll regret it. And you'll probably end up overeating something else. It'll become food noise. If you have some of the legendary trifle or the tater tot casserole or whatever it is for you, you're going to have solid footing when the food noise about it starts up. Instead of reminding yourself of all the reasons why you're not having some of the trifle this year, you can remind yourself that you did have some trifle this year. It was lovely. You sat down with it and paid attention to every bite and everything. In fact, you were so present that you're going to be able to remind yourself of how it tasted and how it felt in your mouth and how it was just as amazing as it is every year. And you're sure it's going to be just as amazing next year. But you do not have to go back for more right now. There has to be a limit. Not having a limit is what got you into trouble in the first place. This one is kind of like last week's tip to have a little so you don't end up having a lot. Your favorites are your favorites for a reason. You love them for a reason. Skip something else. Find a way to balance it out. You know how many calories you have. And you know how many calories your favorites are. And if you don't, you should try and find out. Build out the recipe and work it out if you have to. Plug it into an app. And if it's too much work and it doesn't feel worth it, I've got to ask you if it's really a favorite. I mean, not wanting to know could be a denial thing too, right? I did not want to know. I did not want to know how many calories were in my favorite meal at Burger King. I knew it was going to be bad. I knew it was too many. So I decided I didn't want to know, but I needed to know. Have your favorites, but have your eyes open about them. I want your eyes open for tip number 8 too. Remember your long-term goals. Do not forget why you're doing this. Yeah, I know it's Christmas or Halloween or Yom Kippur. And yeah, I know it only comes once a year and it's your absolute favorite. And I got it. How long do you want to keep doing this? How many more Yom Kippurs do you want to have? When you're making your 4th trip around the hors d'oeuvre table, ask yourself, how much longer do you want to have to keep losing weight? I know it's only a couple of pounds. It's hardly a setback at all. But is it? How long do you want to keep doing this? Wouldn't it be great if instead of telling yourself that you'll just have to keep going for a few extra weeks to make up for that weight, you didn't have to make up for anything? There's a huge mindset component here. Let's get a tad brutal for just a second, as you may think I've already been brutal enough this episode, and I apologize, but we're doing it. I don't give a shit if you gain 8 pounds over Christmas. I know that you'll get it off eventually, but you should care. You should be focused on getting this part of your life over with as expeditiously as you can. How long do you want to keep doing this? I know the trifle is amazing. I know it's all very special, but if it's not about the food, which it isn't, what does your whole attitude about your eating in the last quarter say about your relationship with food? Sure, you deserve the Nanaimo bars, but you also deserve to get to your goal. You deserve to make different choices so you can challenge your relationship with food. You deserve to come out of this year's last quarter feeling better about yourself, not worse. Is it about getting what you deserve or justifying what you want? Is it about making sure you enjoy yourself or is it about self-sabotage? You already know how you're going to feel if you make less than great choices. What if you kept your overall goal front of mind so that it can help you stay on track? What if you pushed yourself a little harder this year, not to focus on eating less, but to focus on what you're choosing to eat more? Your long-term goals are worthy of your focus too. It is unbelievably hard to choose the long-term goal over the short-term desire. But if you take a second to remind yourself of those goals, of what you're working towards, of what you want so badly to get your weight under control, right? You're going to stand a better chance of standing up to your short-term desire. You can do this. Even if it feels like you can't, and I sound like a lunatic, I'm fine with that. You can still do this. Our last one today is a bit of a switch, but you guys have responded in droves to the episode I did a few episodes ago on maintaining. This segment is still for everybody, so please keep listening. I already know what I'm going to say, and I promise this pertains to you too, no matter where you are on this journey. But based on how much you guys liked episode 73, I thought our last segment of this episode and the holiday 2-parter, and really this whole series of lists of 9, right? We're going to end it off with getting through the last quarter in maintenance mode. The last quarter's tough for you if you're maintaining too. I feel that. Basically, everything that I've said over the last 2 episodes has applied to you too. You know what to do. You know how to keep going. You know the little tricks and tools you need to use to get yourself through the holidays. Remember how it used to feel. Keep reminding yourself that you don't want to do it again. You don't want to have to play catch up in January when this is all wrapped up. You don't want to be dealing with all those old feelings. Regain is rough. If you've been there, you know it's not a fun place to be, and it's not somewhere you want to go. Imagine how awesome it's going to feel if you come out the other side unscathed. Start being proud of yourself now. Let yourself imagine. See yourself looking down at those numbers in the beginning of January and smiling. If this is your first time in maintenance mode in the last quarter, it's okay to feel overwhelmed and maybe even slightly terrified. It really is. That's normal. That's totally normal. It's also okay if you're feeling pretty confident. That's fine too, because no matter which group you're in, you can definitely do this. Stop telling yourself you can't. Stop telling yourself you just know you're going to gain weight and be disappointed in yourself when you get on the scale. You don't actually know that. Enough with the defeatist attitude. You don't have a time machine and you don't know what's going to happen. So stop acting like you do. What would happen if you went into it believing that you absolutely can? And this is one of the things I was specifically referring to when I said this segment was still for everybody. What would happen if you went into this believing it's going to be all right? Having a little faith in yourself that you can make good choices that aren't going to derail you. Because when it's decision time and you're going into it believing that, oh, you're going to make bad choices, it's an awful lot more likely that you're going to make bad choices. But if you go into it believing that you can do it, you can make a better choice. Remind yourself of that time you did before. You're a lot more likely to make a better choice again. Don't be afraid to break out some tools if you need to, whether it's your first year in maintenance mode or your 14th. If you feel like you're getting out of hand, start tracking again. Get an actual handle on what you're doing. 3A weigh it. Burying your head in the sand is what gets you into trouble. If you're feeling tempted to just throw caution to the wind and eat whatever you want and see what happens, I'm going to warn you, you are standing at the edge of a very slippery slope. And there's black ice the whole way down. Here's what I see happen again and again. Gladys decides that she's going to say, screw it. She got to her goal weight. She deserves to eat like it's the good old days because it's the holiday season, right? Okay, pause. First, I was going to question the good old days part. Was it? Really? What was the good part? The feeling bad about yourself or your weight or your choices? Which part was good? The guilt, the shame? Were those the good parts? I'm pretty sure I've done 17 segments over the last 2 episodes about the good old days. Sure. There's that then, right? Okay, let's just go back to Gladys's holiday adventure. Gladys says, fuck it. Let's just eat like normal. And she means her old normal. And I don't like her calling that normal, but that's a whole other thing. Fine. So Gladys has a good old days Christmas. Fine. She's telling herself as she munches her way through the week before, during, and after Christmas that she can handle what comes. She lost that weight before. Even if she gains a few pounds, she'll just get it off again. So munch to New Year's, and she's definitely still in, the good old days because New Year's Day is a holiday too. And on the second, she hops on the scale, and Gladys is not happy. She did not think she was going to gain 8 pounds in 3 weeks, but she did. So she signed herself up for a solid 2 months of tracking and working to get into the headspace to get it off again. She's got to get back into a deficit and stay there. And she didn't even think this was possible. It's devastating. She's furious with herself and disappointed and sad. She's all kinds of things, and not one of them feels good. All kinds of old triggers are popping back up. The good old days don't seem to have the same calendar that she does because she tried to leave and now she's stuck there. It's harder than she thought it was going to be to get the weight off again. Now it's March and she's still chasing 5 pounds. It's June and she's still got 3 to go. And this is the good Gladys outcome here. Seriously, that's a relatively positive way that could go down. Because here's another way that I've seen this play out. Gladys says, screw it, heads back to the good old days for some holiday eating, gains the 8 pounds, gets super depressed about it, slides even further. By the time she comes up for air, she's more than 20 pounds in the hole. She gets even more depressed. Guess how bad it is the next time she surfaces? Remember when I said that this choice was like standing on the edge of a slippery slope covered in black ice? It is. And it's very hard to predict how far you'll slide once you start to build momentum. 85% gain their weight back. So that might give us a clue. Don't be a Gladys. Don't throw caution to the wind this year. Your goal is to make it out of the last quarter in maintenance mode, right? If that's where you are, not to make it out and to have to start losing again, right? Or to have to play catch up. It is doable to not have to do those things. Okay. Next week is the first in a two-parter. It's Ask Whatever number 24, and it's the episode that I promised I would do when I held my first webinar last month. You can still see the replay and you can get the worksheets, and they're both still free. We'll pop the link to those in the notes. But during the webinar, I realized that I didn't have a snowball's chance in hell of answering all the questions or of answering them as thoroughly as I would like to. So I decided to do a podcast episode about it. Well, they're not all going to fit into one episode. So our next two actually are going to be special Ask Whatevers with some really cool questions. And there's a lot of them. Oh my God. I'm still not sure I'm going to be able to do everything, but I'm going to try and prioritize the ones that I couldn't get to live. So I opened up today talking about New Year's resolutions, and I argued that you don't need resolutions. You need resolve. I'm going to be completely shameless and suggest that you give my weight loss workbook a try if you're looking to borrow some of my resolve. It's on Amazon, and you will find it if you search Disruptor and my name, Charlotte Skanes. If you really want to dive in and get serious about losing weight and changing your relationship with food, click the link to the program in the notes. My podcast is pretty awesome, but it covers about 15% of what I do in the program, and it has none of the structure. So I am unbelievably excited for the next couple of episodes, and I've got a couple of surprises for you before the new year gets here. So keep trying, keep tracking, don't be intimidated, and don't give up. You've totally got this. Thank you for listening to Disrupting Obesity with Charlotte Skanes. If you know it's time to take back control, lose the weight, and keep it off, reach out to me privately with a direct message on Instagram that says ready, so you can start disrupting obesity.